It is a warm evening here in Westminster, but politically we're in the chill of winter. Yesterday, Prime Minister Boris Johnson was accused by his more strident critics of organising a coup against parliamentary democracy. Today, the resignation of Ruth Davidson, the leader of the Scottish Conservatives and Unionist Party, calls into question the state of the Union itself. What isn't Boris Johnson willing to risk in order to stay in power and get Brexit done?
How far was Ruth Davidson's decision to resign due to Boris Johnson? And what will it mean for the future of the Scottish Tories?
And we're in the shadow of the magnificence of the greatest railway bridge in the world, just for the hell of it. We've been speaking to Jeremy Corbyn about his response to Boris Johnson. And is he or is he not really committing to a second independence referendum for Scotland?
To lose one Tory leader over Brexit looks like misfortune. To lose two begins to look like carelessness. As for losing three, well, today Ruth Davidson completed the trifecta by stepping down as Scottish Conservative leader after almost 8 years in charge, citing not just a desire to spend time with her family, but also the conflict that she felt over Brexit. But in her resignation speech, she insisted that she had stared Boris Johnson in the eye and he had assured her that he was trying to get a Brexit deal. Our Scotland correspondent Kieran Jenkins has more and a warning. There is flash photography from the start of his report.
Without Ruth Davidson, opponents of no deal and Scottish independence look that much weaker tonight. She's bowing out as Scottish Tory leader before Brexit comes to a head.
It is therefore with a heavy heart that this morning I wrote to the chairman of the Scottish Conservative Party to tender my resignation.
She said she wouldn't support no deal. Now she won't have to.
You all know, and I have never sought to hide, the conflict that I have felt over Brexit. Despite that conflict, I have attempted to chart a course for our party which recognises and respects the referendum result, while seeking to maximise opportunities and mitigate risks for key Scottish businesses and sectors.
Her reasons are personal and political and inseparable. Ruth Davidson and her partner Jen are new mums. Would she, at the expense of family time, go into battle for Boris Johnson? She says the idea now of fighting elections fills her with dread.
Having tried to be a good leader over the years, I have proved a poor daughter, sister, partner and friend. The party and my work has always come first, often at the expense of commitments to loved ones.
Since she became leader of the Scottish Conservatives 8 years ago, Ruth Davidson demanded attention. She was lauded by Tory modernisers, pro-equal marriage, intent on changing the party's image. The Scottish independence referendum defined her leadership. It became a template for electoral success. As SNP support soared, she hoovered up no voters and made herself the face of unionism in Scotland. In the 2017 general election, Ruth Davidson took the Scottish Conservatives from 1 to 13 seats, essentially securing Theresa May's majority. But by then, that Brexit conflict of hers was already baked in. 2016, the EU referendum, Ruth Davidson went after Boris Johnson and said this.
They lied about Turkey's entrance to Europe. They lied about the European army because we've got a veto over that. They put these in their leaflets and they've lied about this here tonight too, and it's not good enough. You deserve the truth. You deserve the truth.
You accused the Leave campaign and Boris Johnson of not telling the truth during the EU referendum campaign. Do you now believe that those people who are running the government, including Boris Johnson, are being honest about the prospects of a no deal, about their reasons for suspending Parliament? And can you, in good faith, defend the position of the Tory party now under Boris Johnson?
Well, look, there has been a lot that has been written about my relationship with the Prime Minister. I went down to Downing Street to meet him last week in a private meeting. I stared him right in the eye. I asked him outright, look, I need to know, are you actually trying to get a deal or not? And he categorically assured me that he was. So I want him to get that deal. I believe that's what he and his government are working towards, and I support him in that effort.
So for the Prime Minister and Scotland's First Minister, perhaps some relief.
Actually, sit down.
One fewer foe on both counts.
Look, I don't doubt what she says, that the driving motivation here is the family considerations and having become a mother last year. But I don't think there is any doubt that a factor in her decision is her disagreement with Boris Johnson. Ruth has reclaimed her independence today. I think it's time for Scotland to do likewise.
But Boris Johnson discovered himself this summer. Popularity in Scotland, not a given. If he is planning a general election, are those vital Scottish Tory seats now vulnerable?
There's a Ruth-sized hole in Scottish politics, perhaps in British politics as well. She was probably the most prominent Liberal Conservative left in the country, and that light's been snuffed out.
Her pro-union formula won votes in very un-Tory territory. They have a councillor here in Shettleston in Glasgow's East End. But has politics now moved on? What did she contribute to Scottish political life, Ruth Davidson?
Nothing. Nothing.
I like Boris Johnson.
Do you?
Yes.
Why do you like Boris Johnson?
Because I think he's just our Donald Trump.
She might have made some difference if she did hang around. She's maybe quit too early, I think, maybe.
Ruth Davidson didn't hang around for a Brexit showdown with Boris Johnson, but at what cost to the political causes she cherishes most?
Well, Kieran joins us now from Glasgow, and with me here on the banks of the Thames is our political editor, Gary Gibbon. More from you in a minute, Gary. But first, Kieran, what does Ruth Davidson's resignation actually mean for the future of the Scottish Conservatives and also unionism?
Well, no doubt today who's feeling pretty chipper? Nicola Sturgeon, the Scottish First Minister. Ruth Davidson, she pretty much came to embody the opposition to independence in Scotland. There's nobody really with her profile waiting in the wings to take ownership of the pro-union cause. And that leaves the SNP and Nicola Sturgeon with something of an open goal, really. But this is a departure which has consequences way beyond Scotland. Some people, particularly within the Conservative Party, looked to Ruth Davidson to take the fight to Boris Johnson on Brexit. She previously said she could not support no deal. She was worried no deal undermined the union, which of course was central to her whole political project here. But even in parting on a day that other Tory big hitters laid into the Prime Minister, Ruth Davidson pointedly did not. And in fact, we were told she supports Boris Johnson's suspension of Parliament. So there's no doubt she genuinely wants to be with her family, but perhaps this was one fight too far for her, and that, of course, is very uncharacteristic.
Thanks, Kieran. Well, let's turn to Gary. For a majority of one, Boris Johnson's not afraid to roll the dice, is he?
No, I think we can definitely say that. Today's been dominated by people reacting, reeling almost after that Boris Johnson initiative yesterday, suspending Parliament. On the side where people are opposed to no deal, MPs opposed to no deal, you're getting a very strong push to get fellow MPs to make a stand next week. Don't wait. One of the extraordinary things here is that one of the people behind the scenes who's doing most of the work here is Philip Hammond. I mean, how politics has changed. A figure of Tory orthodoxy, as people sometimes say, a sort of ultimate, quintessential sort of conservative gin and jag man. And there he is organising all of this. On the government side, they think they've actually pulled a bit of a blinder, and there is growing confidence there that they are herding these opponents of no deal into a place they don't want to be. And they think they can close down their operation next week and fend it off, push those people into trying to try something at the very end of October. And in the end, I was told by one cabinet minister today, what they really want to do is sort of herd them all into a place where their only option is to vote Jeremy Corbyn into number 10, which is something they think there isn't a majority for in the House of Commons. So they're confident that what they're doing is working, but there are bigger questions sort of emerging, partly because of the Ruth Davidson resignation, resignation of a member of the government, albeit in the House of Lords, general dissatisfaction, people like Philip Hammond suddenly turning into rebels. What are they actually doing? Is there collateral damage happening to the entire Conservative project as they drive the Constitution, as it were, at great speed over speed bumps? After the summer, they're back and in each other's faces. Next week, it'll be the MPs, already rehearsing their lines for the battle to come over no-deal Brexit.
There is a real danger of a scorched earth Brexit, one in which the constitution is seriously undermined, but one in which the union is also undermined. Ruth Davidson is stepping down for her own reasons, but that path potentially leads to a breakaway of Scotland.
They're becoming more and more hysterical. They're going to get more hysterical yet.
In Helsinki today, the Foreign Secretary, Dominic Raab. This summer, he was the only Tory leadership candidate to openly back what others thought was the toxic idea of suspending Parliament. He wasn't commenting on whether prorogation made no deal more likely. Others did.
Well, yes, as a reality, I would say that we have to prepare to that, and let's see what's going to happen in coming weeks.
Here again is what happened to the parliamentary timetable yesterday. In green, the day's MPs might have expected to be sitting, and maybe even making progress if they wanted to, on a bill to stop a no-deal Brexit. These include the conference recess days, which opposition MPs with some Tory rebels thought they had a very good chance of voting away in coming days. The effect of Boris Johnson's prorogation was to wipe out a lot of these days, also days where you have to debate the Queen's speech that comes at the end of it. Number 10 is now telling Tory rebels who are thinking of backing opposition efforts to block no deal, don't do it next week, wait until the end of this period, the last few days before the planned Brexit date.
Technically, it's possible that the Conservative MPs could do it in late October, so the government's not lying to them, but you know they are certainly selling them a line that may prove to be an unsafe ground on which to hang their hat if they really want to prevent a no-deal Brexit.
They may reflect on it and think they were gullible in years to come.
Possibly.
In actual fact, the net loss in days is about 4. So to call this...
Actually, I make the net loss in days substantially above that.
Well, we disagree because you're saying that we would have sat through the conferences, and I'm saying we wouldn't have done.
Even if in the next few days opposition MPs combined with Tory rebels managed to pass a bill that required the government to seek an extension of the Brexit date, senior figures in the government have discussed the possibility of not enacting that, ignoring it.
This is now the people versus the establishment, and for the sake of our democracy, the people must win.
So if there's a bill passed next week that tries to stop no deal, do you think Boris Johnson would be entitled to, say, sit on it for a while, not send it for royal assent, let prorogation happen, play any sort of tactics he likes?
Well, at the end of the day, you would have to ask the Prime Minister that.
Would you consider it normal if this was a Jeremy Corbyn-led government? Would you allow it? Would you be standing here looking sanguine and calm?
Well, I don't think there's going to be a Jeremy Corbyn.
Yeah, you're not. That's not answering the question. You'd go berserk if you thought that they were taking this many days away from MPs over something so controversial.
But they haven't, because we would normally have risen for the conferences anyway. That's my point.
We will pay, your family will pay for your health insurance.
The suspension of Parliament has triggered some demonstrations again in Whitehall and beyond.
Guys, this doesn't work, all right? I want to answer your questions, but you're not letting me do so.
Including Cheltenham, where the Tory MP has the pro-EU Lib Dems close on his heels at the next election.
Thank you for coming. Thank you for coming.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Opponents of no deal are hoping they can mount many more protests across the country over the weekend and into next week.
Gary Gibbon, our political editor. Well, once again, we asked for an interview with a representative from the government. And once again, there was no one available to appear on this programme. But a short time ago, I spoke to the Conservative MP and father of the House, Ken Clarke, who earlier accused Boris Johnson of telling blatant lies. I began by asking him if this amounted to a coup against his house.
Well, coups, that's just trying to apply a silly word to it. It just is unconstitutional. In effect, we're being told we don't have a constitution because we know we don't have a written constitution, of which we're all inordinately proud. That means there are only conventions. That means that the government can ignore them. In the long run, this stores up quite a lot of problems. Meanwhile, it's just a cynical attempt to try to stop Parliament talking about or voting on the Prime Minister's preferred route to leaving with no deal, because he knows the one thing there's certainly a majority against in the House of Commons, there's a majority against the policy he's pursuing.
So when Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister, says it's no big deal, effectively, we're just cutting short the calendar by a few days, do you believe him? Do you take him by his word?
He doesn't believe that either. I certainly don't.
Is he a liar?
He's certainly not telling the truth, which is afraid has rather frequently been happening in the last few weeks.
And there are some MPs who've suggested that they will just refuse to leave the chamber. The police will have to extract them.
All this is rubbish. What matters is, can a majority emerge which actually is agreed on what we should do, which begins to bring together political and public opinion and actually gets a majority, takes us forward to a more sensible situation.
But how do you achieve that majority?
By getting the necessary time and winning the necessary votes in Parliament and getting people to compromise with each other and getting people to pluck up their courage to divide the discredited establishment of whichever party they happen to be in.
Are you ready to be a caretaker Prime Minister?
The first question is legislation. After that will come a confidence vote if the government blocks it. If that confidence vote is lost by the government, then you get into all-party governments. That government has to decide, agree entirely what it's proposing to do. Then you get on to the entertaining, rather less important question of let's have fun arguing about who reads it.
But to be on the record and clear for a minute, if it got to that stage, you would be prepared to lead such an administration?
Oh, if people are the right, if sensible people ask me, yes, I would. But as I've just explained, that's not in any way affecting the way I'm behaving now, because that requires a lot of if. I'm very much hoping it'll all be resolved long before we get to that stage.
On another serious matter, the resignation of Ruth Davidson today, how much of a blow is that for the unionism part of the Tory party?
It's a very serious blow. The union's being threatened steadily and increasingly as this farce goes on. I mean, the group that have seized control of the government are essentially English nationalists, very right-wing English nationalists. And I don't think the majority of people in Northern Ireland and Scotland really want to break away from the United Kingdom. This all feeds into the arguments of those who say, look how terrible the system is, all these dreadful English people, ignore your wishes, ignore your interests, this is just all English nonsense. And the case for Northern Ireland going into the south and Scottish independence gets stronger. Now, as Ruth is one of the strongest arguments for voting Tory that we have in Scotland, losing Ruth is a disaster, but I sympathise with her.
So has your Tory party become the Brexit party or the UK party in disguise?
Well, my Tory party is still there.
But the one that's in charge at the moment?
The group that are in charge, yes, I don't know what they are really, but the policies they're following are not the policies that mainstream, dare I say, even establishment Tories like me of the last 50 years would have supported. Anybody who worked with Margaret or John Major or even David Cameron, I don't quite understand how any of them are supporting the path that Boris has suddenly lurched onto in the last 2 or 3 weeks.
But if the only way to stop a hard Brexit, a no-deal Brexit, is to bring down this government in a vote of no confidence, would you take part in that?
Yes, but that's some way down the hill yet.
So you would vote against the government in a vote of no confidence?
If it was the only way of stopping a no-deal exit, and if the government hadn't got any sensible grown-up policy on the subject to avoid it. But it's important that I add, and you don't edit out, that there's far more sensible steps to take first, like getting the majority in Parliament to come together to legislate and to force the government to follow a more sensible and intelligent policy.
And if you did vote against your own government in that eventual vote of no confidence, you'd be signing your own political suicide note, wouldn't you?
At my stage in my career, the idea that I have concern for the future of my own personal career, I think would be a little misguided. I'm without being too pompous, I will vote according to what I think is the national interest and also in accordance what I think are the principles of the Conservative Unionist Party, which I have been a loyal and sometimes leading member for the last half century. In fact, for 60 years, a member of the party.
Ken Clarke, thanks very much.
Pleasure.
Well, the Labour leader, Jeremy Corbyn, has said he wants the House of Commons to move as quickly as possible when MPs return next week to try and block a no-deal Brexit. Speaking on a visit to Scotland, Mr Corbyn said he intended to launch a challenge on Tuesday aimed at stopping Boris Johnson from suspending Parliament. Our chief correspondent Alex Thompson managed to speak to Mr Corbyn and he joins us now live from North Queensferry. What did he say?
Well, yes, indeed. Well, I suppose that crisis is the canvas on which leadership is most clearly depicted, and we certainly appear to have a crisis right now in our politics. Therefore, I think for Jeremy Corbyn coming north, he faced two tests and have been set out very clearly by two events, Boris Johnson and what he did yesterday, and of course Ruth Davidson's resignation today. Now, it's fair to say that in the years of the Brexit turmoil, the leadership and the position of the Labour Party have, by common consent, been somewhat opaque. They've also been somewhat opaque at the Labour Party, and in particular Jeremy Corbyn's leadership on the issue of Scottish independence. So two challenges after a very clear move from the Prime Minister yesterday and a clear move by Ruth Davidson. What could Jeremy Corbyn, as leader of the opposition and leader of the Labour Party, do to clarify what he's going to do to stop Boris Johnson in his tracks, as it were? And what is the Labour Party position with regard to the possibility of a second independence referendum here in Scotland? So we waited in Dunfermline, just up the road, for Jeremy Corbyn to get out of his car and ask him a few questions. Try praying. The message on the wall of the Kirk for a visiting opposition leader with narrowing choices to thwart a Prime Minister.
Mr Corbyn, can you tell us when are you going to call a vote of no confidence?
We'll be challenging the government next Tuesday.
Next Tuesday?
Challenging the government next Tuesday on the attempt to dissolve Parliament to prevent us preventing a no-deal exit from the European Union, and obviously the option of motion of no confidence is there as well at the same time.
But surely people want, this is a time of crisis, you've said so yourself, a smash and grab on democracy. People, the country need to know when that actual challenge is going to be made.
Well, I've just told you, next Tuesday.
That is categorically when the vote of no confidence.
No, I've told you this. What we're doing on Tuesday, don't jump.
I'm seeking clarity, that's all.
Of course, that's your job. What we're doing is challenging the government on attempting to leave without a deal. So we're trying to legislate to do that. That's what the discussion with all the other opposition parties is about. The option of the motion of no confidence sits there in parallel with that process. This government is trying to undermine and damage our democracy in a most terrible way. This country is in danger of crashing out on the 31st of October with no deal, and all the damage that will do to jobs, to living standards and to trade all over this country. We've got to stop that, and that's exactly what we'll be doing next Tuesday.
But there's concern that there is no legislative option now. There is no legislative way out of this. But is that a genuine concern for people? That there is no way out of this in a legislative way?
The genuine concern of people ought to be that Boris Johnson is trying to ride roughshod over our democracy. The legislative demand we've made by a lot of MPs from the Labour Party and other parties is that Parliament legislate rapidly to prevent that happening.
Right. So no confidence in the mix on Tuesday, but he can't or won't quite spell it out. A second Scottish independence referendum also apparently on the cards, but again, he just can't or won't quite say so.
It's not my priority that there should be an Indie referendum in Scotland. I think it would be damaging to the Scottish economy as well, and so we would see it as not a priority for the early part of a Labour government.
The Tories tonight accusing Jeremy Corbyn of breaking up the United Kingdom in return for a backroom deal with the SNP to get into number 10. Just down the road in Inverkeithing, amongst the don't knows and don't cares, folk overwhelmingly unimpressed at Mr Johnson's lengthy suspension of Parliament.
He's a fool.
He's a fool?
I think he's a fool, yeah. I think that it will suit SNP down to the ground, and let's have independence.
I think the Parliament's for all the MPs in the round, all the MPs should be there, rather than just him deciding, well, I'm going to close that, so that you're not having a vote. It's like he's taking the reins and he's going to do what he's wanting to do.
I think it's disgraceful.
Disgraceful?
Yeah, totally disgraceful. I mean, it seems to me that it's an avoidance tactic.
definitely.
Avoiding what?
Well, avoiding the Parliament actually working on trying to strike a deal, you know.
Come Tuesday, matters might be resolved, but Labour needs a Tory rebellion and they habitually evaporate. Mr Corbyn's best guess, we might just do it, he said today.